So Amsterdam doesn't really sound like the fashion capital of Europe, but there's a lot more going on here than you'd imagine, isn't there? Who's based here these days that everybody's heard of?
Yeah, I moved here over 10 years ago, and to be honest, yeah, I didn't realize actually how many brands are here. Like back then, I just thought it was Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein who I worked for. But actually now you've got G-Star, Scotch and Soda, these were all here before. You've now got so many different brands here. And also, I'd say, you've got brands that are actually developing here, right? Like PVH.
Lots of boutique houses.
Yeah. But also there's a lot of kind of regional offices that are going on now. Like there's so many, in a section in Amsterdam called Houthavens, now there's like bestsellers there, Hugo Boss is there, like Joop, there's just so many groups that have come in, and almost Houthavens has now become like a little bit of a fashion hub.
Yeah.
And none of that existed 10 years ago. It was more just like key fashion houses. But also now, also since COVID, loads of like pop-ups have come up.
Yeah.
So there's loads of little brands that are popping up here and there. So yeah, you wouldn't expect Amsterdam to be like that, but actually there is a lot of buzz going on in that kind of world. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely evolved, put it that way.
So did PVH or Calvin, was that the reason you came to Amsterdam, or did you come to Amsterdam and then land at Calvin?
Yeah, so yeah, literally I was in London. I was running DKNY menswear from design to production for 2 of the labels. Mm-hmm. And then yeah, Calvin Klein reached out, and then yeah, to be honest, I had no idea about Amsterdam, didn't know anyone, was an exciting role, and I thought go for it. So yeah. 5 weeks later after the interview, one-way ticket, and I landed in Amsterdam, and that was 10 years ago.
Never looked back.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm super glad I did it. I've kind of evolved in so many aspects. So yeah, it's really, for me, was a great move for my career and personally. So yeah, super happy that I kind of took the leap, shall we say. So that was really good.
So you still look about 25, but you've actually been working in fashion for over 20 years now, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm now 42. I don't do Botox. I'm just maybe...
just eat clean, don't drink alcohol.
Lots of water. So yeah, lucky for that. But yeah, no, I've worked, 21 years. I graduated after university at 21, did a design management degree, and then my first job actually, Next Retail. Yeah. So I was a trainee assistant buyer, and then just evolved from there, and so predominantly worked in buying, merch and PD roles, product development, and 20 years later, it goes quick.
So obviously 20 odd years in fashion, started off with Next, and you've worked at a number of brands, but the role that you're doing now is much more in the world of merchandising, buying, planning, and you're in that lovely combination of having a design background, but also working a lot more with data and analytics and trying to build those effective collections. I think was one of the ways that you put things on your TED Talk. Yeah. Tell us a bit more about the role that you're doing today.
Yeah, so I think, 20 years ago when I started, it was all feeling and papers and sketches and lots of meetings and talking. And to be honest, that still happens 20 years later. That's how our industry works. But I think there's a massive kind of effort now in planning, in data insights, in really just looking more factually rather than just constantly looking at like feelings, if that makes sense. And I think, personally, I'm all for it. So I work very much in a merchandising role. It's very much looking at how we can generate optimal collections. So it's really about, if you have, let's say, 10,000 options, maybe you only need 6,000 and it will still generate the correct revenue. Exactly. Yeah. So it's very much about how optimal do you want your collection. Are there products that you can already identify won't work? Are there products that you're missing? And it's honestly like using analytics, AI, but definitely in a product world, and being able to really come to the table collaboratively, because it's not one or the other. Personally, I really feel like it's together. It's almost like within an operating model, you need creatives, but you also need the business side as well. You need like
the hard facts.
Exactly, like it's a strategy element, isn't it? Yeah. What's the strategy? What's your range plan? What product do you want to push? What's your hero product? Where do you really feel optimally you want your collection to be? And you can decide that personally or with a group, but it's very much about how you want to be able to really do it with design, right? So you really want to kind of optimally make a decision that, okay, based on trends and based on where our sell-through is going, let's say we're going to push knitwear. But it's also like, what type of knitwear? What quantity do we think we should invest in? Like, where is the future trends in the product groups? You know what I mean? It's all about yin and yang.
So one thing that I always find super interesting is, obviously you've got some super creative people on the design side, but then I guess the ultimate thing is when a customer actually buys a product. So how do you really sort of plan and understand, even if something's a superb design, your design team really believe in it, how do you then make the decision that the customer's ready for it? Because lots of things can be quite sort of out there, particularly when you watch some of the fashion week shows with some of the more luxury brands. How do you find that balance between identifying what the next trend is going to be and then really understanding that your customers are actually ready for it?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's trial and error, I always think. And also when it comes to like strategy, I think sometimes, and over the 20 years from what I see and have been involved in as well, sometimes you don't let a strategy actually come through. Sometimes you're in a position where, like, you could say, for example, we're really going to kind of invest in essentials, or we're really this season going to decide we need to start working on, I don't know, more chinos in the collection, whatever. But actually, the way fashion is and how it evolves so quickly, and also how people come and go, I always think, like, did you actually ever finish the strategy? In a sense of, did you see how it actually performed in sell-through? Because it can take a good year, right?
Yeah.
So you could be like, we're all about essentials, we're all about this. And then maybe 6 months later, you now want to elevate. You now want to start introducing higher price points, for example. You want to start elevating the fabrics. You want to be more niche, like have a different tone of voice. And of course, you then have to wait again through the whole development phase until you see sell-through. So I'm always on the assumption of, do you ever actually get to the point where you fully show what you plan?
End to end.
Yeah, or you just constantly chasing your tail. And I always think when it comes to collection building, you always want to keep your hardcore product, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine 80% of your revenue comes from 40% of the collection, and you know that chino or that jumper or whatever is always going to make the revenue. It's the bestseller. Everyone wants it. The sell-through is incredible.
Yeah.
So it's
but
almost,
then you need something else that's got the DNA of the brand there as well.
exactly. It's almost like don't touch what's not broken. And you want to make sure that you have that, because your customers love the fabric, they love the fit, they know what they're coming for. And I think in any brand, you want to make sure there's consistency, right? It's like a vendor base. If you change your vendor base every season, it's not going to be good, because you really want to make sure they understand even the manuals, like what's the procedures, the processes. They understand your gradings, your markers, your fits, like there's consistency for the customer. But imagine if you did that every season, every time, just change the colors up, it would be crazy boring, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I always think, like, imagine 30% of the line is innovative, newness. Like you have to be in a position where you want to bring newness. And it's almost testing as well, isn't it? Like, does the customer like this or not? Like, should we start investing in this type of the world? But again, there's also a difference between retail and wholesale. If you look at wholesale, you're very much more about like what is actually the sell-in at the end, where retail, you can definitely make more hardcore decisions yourself because you're controlling your footfall, you're controlling your allocations, your store presence. So I think you can also just be in a position where you want to get those insights, right? And I think it's really important when you come to wholesale or your regions, your regional offices, that you have close contact and you understand what is the market needs. And this is the whole point about kind of range planning, that you want to get the biggest depth of information to be able to support the most optimal range plan for collection. Because there's a lot of talking, right, in our world. And it's very easy to say, oh, the product was wrong. But then it's like, but you've had 6 months of collaboration to get to that product.
Yeah. When you're building effective collections, kind of how do you bring in the customer opinion to that? Is that something that that you've been able to do in the roles that you've worked in, where obviously understanding trends is really important, but also really understanding like specific what people are going to buy? Is that very much based on what's happened in the past and then trying to predict what's going to happen in the future? Is that a bit of a dangerous thing to do based on trends changing so quickly?
If you're talking about specific trends, you've got a position where, I mean, if you're fast track with held options, so for example, 20 years ago in retail, when we used to do our range plan, we would always, at the top section, like we would have rankings. So imagine you have 500 pieces, 500 options of knitwear, and you would rank them and band them in a sense of how much you actually want to be able to sell for each band.
Yeah.
So there are positions where you leave some of the higher selling sell-through options at the top.
Yeah.
And then you want to be in a position where you say, you know what, we booked the fabrics already, we have a European production, we can get this turnaround in 5 weeks. And then you're in a position to say, let's wait for the trends, let's see what sell-through does, let's see what catwalk does. And then you can react really quickly for those particular products. And then you put them right in at the top of your ranking, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, from back in those days, 9 times out of 10, they were always your bestseller because you were reacting on sell-through, on trend. And it could just be that it's the same t-shirt, but you've done a new print because you've already booked the fabric. Sometimes you've already had it cut. You're literally just fast tracking 4 or 5 weeks reacting. In that sense, you can really rely on trends and be able to do what you want to do. But then there's the flip side where maybe you're a more premium brand and it's not necessarily about trends. It's more about the brand DNA, what we aspire to be, where we want to go. And I think for brands like that, you can't react so quickly, especially in a wholesale environment where you're planning your calendar 12, 13 months before the actual collection.
And where you are now, it's everything, isn't it? It's wholesale, it's direct to consumer, it's online, it's bricks and mortar.
For sure,
like
yeah.
you spread across multiple different categories.
Yeah.
Like when you're working at, I mean, obviously, it'll be very different being in a little boutique brand and kind of understanding a small number of customers. At scale, I presume this is where, when you're talking about that combination of the creativity and data, is that how you get to the kind of scale that the brands that you've worked for, like Calvin Klein and other brands that you've worked for, is that how they get to that scale of like bringing that combination together of data, creativity, understanding consumers? Is there kind of like a sort of a sweet spot in the middle of all that?
I think, firstly, you have to have like desire for the brand, right? I think if you have the wrong product and you don't really have the story, I think you can do as much D2C and planning as you want, but if the brand doesn't resonate to anyone, then I don't think you'll grow. I think brands that I've worked for in the past are almost like legacy brands like DKNY, and these have such traction and loyalty that of course there is a customer base there, but over the years you're able to grow that loyalty, right? So if you get closer to the customer, if you get their feedback, I mean, again, in retail, you're relying on the stores, right? You're relying on that feedback.
Yeah.
But when it comes to wholesale, you're very much, you can work with the regional teams to really get input. So for example, when I worked at Denim, I was global merchandising director. So I ran merchandising and product development. So if I was in Japan, I'd be working on what does Japan need for their markets. And that was much more store retail versus wholesale. It's very much about what type of product does Japan want? And then also what does Germany want? What does everyone else want? So you kind of, it's like a juggling act. You need to see what all of these elements want to be able to then make the assortment.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't also do everything for everyone because then your collection is huge, your budget doesn't stretch. And of course, in supply chain, you have to make a minimum. If you don't make a minimum and everything's small pieces, you don't make FOB or margin, and then it all fragments into not a great position. So you also have to be mindful that this is the size of your collection, but everyone wants this. And of course, over the years, everyone just wants what they want. And of course, everything gets bigger, everything gets more diluted. And that's when you see certain brands, they have to then start making decisions to actually cut back, to get back to their core DNA, to get back to who they are, because they've almost spread their sales too thin over the time. And that's why I think with data and AI and being a lot more optimal with your range plan, it's like focus on the things that work rather than what you think will work. And that doesn't mean replacing anyone. It's almost like saying to the designers, hey, invest in this type of stuff and it's going to be a winner. let's not waste so much time on product that's actually not going to sell through, is probably going to be cancelled maybe, and then we have a high stock position. It's those kind of conversations which are very new in the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously there's lots of other industries that have been using data for decades now. I mean, I worked in financial services for a long time, and looking at sort of stockbrokers, like they have like multiple screens with like the Bloomberg terminals and the data coming in, and they don't make a single decision without analysing a huge amount of data. And it seems that for a long time, fashion was very much like, we know what customers want, we're going to put the designs together, and we've got a kind of an idea how many will sell in each of the lines, and then kind of go into market with that. And it almost felt a little bit like it was luck to a degree, or just one or two people that were just super good at seeing what's coming next. But I suppose to do things at scale and do them consistently, we've all seen brands that had a couple of fantastic seasons and then slipped off. We've seen some of the big luxury brands that have like almost gone, and then, like you say, got back to the roots and started over again and really slimmed down the range. Where do you think the balance is in bringing in more information? Because obviously, like, creative people will normally be quite resistant to that. Do you tend to find that the more creative people on the teams in fashion are a little more resistant to using data, or have things changed now where they're always looking for like the insights and understanding what it is that the consumers are going to want to buy in the next season?
I definitely have seen a shift. I mean, but also, I always say, like, anyone can talk about clothes. Like, anyone can go into a room and just say, that's nice, I think this. You might be wrong or right, and people may agree or disagree, but it's very easy to get a lot of people in a room and just talk about clothes. Anyone can say, I like that, maybe we should add tipping, maybe we should change the color. Oh, this shade is not so great. Like, anyone can go there. But equally, how many people can you put in one room that can confidently talk end to end, can talk about collection development build-up, such as color palettes, all the way into warehousing and in store? Who has that overarching buying, merchandising, product development kind of experience that can actually make things more optimal and can actually steer the conversation more factually, not reducing creativity, but literally just saying, let's be more focused and let's be more kind of optimal in a sense of where we need to be? Because most KPIs are, what's your stock position, what's your oversold, what's your margin erosion, FOB this, how is your sampling versus production ratio with the vendor? I mean, this all has to still apply, right? How big's your stock fabric position after maybe changing things 10 times?
Yep.
Money talks at the end of the day, and there is a lot of people talking about product. But I feel like the shift has started. People are now starting to talk about, do we need that many options? Should we be a bit more concise? Let's look at sell-through. Let's look at consumer insights. Maybe, like now, AI can tell us, actually, let's invest this quantity into these products or these product groups, even down to color level. That allows the conversations to be a bit more factual. And I find there's not many people that can come to the table in a room and actually talk end-to-end operating of a collection, running an actual collection optimally. But it's very easy to get a lot of people in a room and talk about clothes. and that's where I think the shift in the industry is going. I mean, 20 years ago, you would have never seen a data analyst employed in a fashion company.
No.
It would have
been a diametrically opposed.
Absolutely. It wouldn't be like something that's one of the highest kind of invested job specs. So that for me shows the shift is moving, but it's slow. People still love to work with sketches. People still love to do their thing, and I'm one of them. And it's
in the DNA, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it wouldn't be the fashion industry without it, but
exactly.
And it's how you keep that, but then blend in some of the newer things like AI and analytics and consumer analytics.
I think all of that should support the conversation. Be creative, do what we need to do, but it's more about being in a position where we can actually, come to the table with yin and yang, facts and passion.
I suppose the other elements in this, obviously you've got designers, merchandisers, planners, but I guess the customers are another really important part of this. So how do you think consumer behaviour is changing? Certainly over the last couple of years. Companies like Shein, Temu, before that the likes of Boohoo, and a lot of the fast fashion companies. Are you seeing that being something that will continue, or are we seeing now more people going for vintage and sort of the more well-established and more luxury brands? I mean, it seems to have kind of flip-flopped over the last 20 years of people on moderate income spending a lot of money on designer gear, and then completely the pendulum swung the other way to fast fashion. Where do you think things are going to go in the next sort of 5 years?
To be honest, I think they'll both be there. I think the thing is that price is so important for people, and also speed. I know I feel personally it's calmed down recently. Everyone used to be buy now, wear now. Everyone was like, we need it tomorrow. I do think Gen Z is starting to shift the trend of where sustainability and a purpose actually means something. Mm-hmm. It's almost like chicken and the egg. What started first? Daily deliveries of product, mm-hmm. constant need for now. Who started that? The consumer wanting it, or the brands actually offering it? Because we wear about 20% of our wardrobe, right? We're not really in a position where we're wearing absolutely everything. We're more inclined to buy something new than wear something that we haven't worn sitting in our wardrobe.
Yeah.
So for me personally, that shows that is fast fashion needed? But then you're enticing customers all the time with newness and constant kind of, look at this, did you check this out? This is based on your latest buy. Would you also like to try this? So it is great for the insights, but also as a fast fashion world, it's a nightmare. And then you're constantly then chicken or egg. Are you providing more because the customer wants more, or is the customer demanding it? It's that equilibrium in demand and supply. Yeah. I was in Tokyo in Japan about 5 years ago, and their resale, shall I say vintage resale secondhand market, it was growing massively. But also the way they do it is so impressive, because the Japanese really look after their product. They don't wear it, make holes, they don't throw it on the floor and then give it to secondhand charity.
Yeah, they do more the capsule wardrobe style, don't they?
Yeah.
Small number of pieces,
yeah.
Some of them a little bit more fast fashion, some really expensive items,
yeah.
And then kind of blend those two looks, but having interchangeable items to make a different outfit. That seems to be the way of it there.
I think if you look at the stores as well, just generally across all the brands in Japan, I always find it's like so boutique. Like it's not like you have like a table of, I mean, Uniqlo, let's ignore Uniqlo for now, but it's not like you have a table full of chinos and a table full of t-shirts. I feel like in Japan, much more, every garment has a purpose. But equally, that's what the secondhand stores are like. You literally walk into a store and everything looks brand new because the consumers looked after their stuff so well. Everything's brand new. Everything is looked after to such a level that the experience of those stores are so unique and like boutique that they want to buy secondhand. One, for sustainability, but also it's just the way they're going, and it's growing so huge. So I feel like I'm not really answering the question, but the challenge is there are different customers that want different things. Mm-hmm. And it does show that resale is growing so much that clearly there's a purpose for it. Mm-hmm. But equally, people want stuff now and people want it cheap. So there will always be that market, and that's why the shift is happening.
I mean, I've certainly noticed, particularly working with lots of different fashion brands, that everybody has a sustainability report. Everybody talks a good game. I think there's probably only Patagonia that are a huge company, like north of $1 billion a year in turnover, and probably 3 times that if we really looked at the numbers. But they seem to be the only brand that is at that level of turnover with that many customers that is actually sustainable, but it's like the business was specifically built on that.
Yeah.
And it seems very difficult for a fast fashion company to be able to just kind of turn on a dime and all of a sudden become 100% sustainable. And obviously there's been a lot of time that Patagonia have worked on being sustainable, everything they've done from the marketing, like they live and breathe it. How difficult is it if this is going to be the next trend, if the Gen Zs are going to demand that and legislation's coming through, how difficult will it be for the sort of mid-market, mass market fashion brands to kind of move and become genuinely sustainable, like live and breathe it right the way through the whole business?
I don't think they're not doing it. I think big brands have been for years working on sustainability. They've been looking at better fabrics, they've been looking at better production. Like, I truly believe everyone wants to do it. And definitely people are doing it. And when you look at like the percentages versus last year, what percentage of your fabrics are more sustainable, and all the other things that CSR teams are working on, there's a huge shift forward, and everyone is doing it. But again, it's almost like if buyers mandate that we can only buy your brand if you've actually worked to these kind of sustainability KPIs or targets, and governments are legislating the law, I think you'll see that the uptake and the direction will move so much quicker and faster and harder. Because, I mean, a couple of years ago, really, it was more marketing stories, sustainability, like, this is our sustainability collection. It's almost like AI, sustainability, all these types of things they're 90% talked about, but actually 10% being done in real life.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. It's like, and to your point, that brand has been doing it from the get-go. Their DNA is rooted, and that's the only way they work. So it's almost like they don't have to sell it. Like, they don't go on about it. It's rooted in who they are. Mm-hmm. And that's why the bigger brands are now having to go full circle and now to show this is what we're doing to be more sustainable. But I do believe truly that everyone is trying hard to do it. But there is also an element that if you've worked one way for 20 years and you've fixed your prices, you've fixed your margin, if, for example, you want to move to a more sustainable material, but it's a higher price, is the customer willing to pay more money?
Is it even the same customer?
Exactly. And some people say in surveys, yes, the customer will pay more money. Who knows, really?
But do the numbers reflect it?
Yeah, and this is the whole thing. It's like, do they really want to be in a position where they want to spend more money to be more sustainable?
Yeah.
So it's like changing the production way of working. It's like changing price points. It's changing
the
what they're used to.
Will the consumer habits reflect that, do you think? Where you're saying, obviously, the newer customers that are coming through, the Gen Zs, are certainly more savvy when it comes to the environment and sustainability. Like, are they going to want as many clothes, or are they going to prefer to invest a little bit more in something that's going to last longer, that they're going to get more usage out of?
I think you have the old school way of working where it's all about change, mindset change.
Yeah.
And then you have all what the Gen Zs want, what governments want, what we're also asking for, mm-hmm. which is just to be less is more, like be more mindful and sustainable. And I definitely think it's going in that direction, 100%. Some brands are doing amazing work on it.
From like a regional point of view, is there a particular country that leads the way as far as trends are concerned that everybody's looking at? Or is it much more about still looking at luxury brands for inspiration, and then that's where everybody else is kind of taking the lead from?
I mean, South Korea is having quite a movement at the moment. I think you see that a lot of brands are opening up stores in Seoul, which, I mean, I've been to Seoul for work before, and it's definitely an emerging market even back then. And there is something really cool about Seoul. And also like Japan, I think those countries, when it comes to trends, I feel like they're a lot more future focused. Yeah. I feel like that they're really, like, the customer really wants something unique. And mm-hmm. even if it's just a basic hoodie, it's more about the fabric or the fit. It's different to European styles. And that's why I really like Asia in a sense of styling, because I think when you go to Japan or South Korea,
everybody looks really cool.
Exactly.
Like everybody looks like they've just walked off a catwalk.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be, I mean, it could be things that you wouldn't even know about. Like, for example, it could be like an injection down jacket. You wouldn't know it's injection down, but the thing is, it just looks the part. And I really think they're so specific with their style that a lot of European brands are kind of looking to that market mm-hmm. and definitely opening up stores. I mean, in the brands that I've worked for in the past, it's always been our top tier product, not necessarily hero product, but very much more elevated, higher price points. They were always being kind of in our range planning would always be for the Japanese market. Mm-hmm. So they definitely have a way in trends that I think everyone looks at. And you can see that with how European stores are now opening up, European brands are now opening up in Seoul.
Yeah.
But it's also regionally, everything's very different, right? I mean, look at Japan now, their price points are quite low. So you see that the Chinese local domestic customers are actually going to Japan to buy their luxury goods. And I think that's always
whereas they used to come to the UK a lot.
Yeah, I think it's like a strategic conversation, isn't it? Like, do you want to make sure that you keep the price points in Japan lower, or do you then increase those price points to keep your Chinese domestic customers in China. There's always this, it's a constant evolution of pricing architecture, your kind of distribution, how you want to plan your collection. And product strategy, yeah, is constantly evolving. And I think that's also what's exciting about it, right? It's not the same every day.
Why do you think brands do get it so wrong? Like, what are the common things that you've seen over the last 20 odd years? Where do you see brands going completely wrong and totally misjudging things?
I mean, if you want to get really technical about it, it can be things like the budget insights aren't there. So like, how much is the budget for that collection? What are the markets going to buy into? Like, I think it's all about the collaboration. You can work with people to build the collections, right? So imagine you have a brand and you have 4 markets, and you work with those markets super closely to decide this is a product we need for our region. And then when you actually launch the collection and the true buyers come to the showrooms and look at the product, they're the ones that are actually telling you yes or no. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a lot of feeling over facts. Like, there's a lot of
feeling over facts. That's a good one. That is definitely something that I've seen in a lot of industries, but probably never more so than I've seen in fashion.
Yeah, I think it's almost like, this is why you see things like mandatory buys and that come into effect, because if you build a collection and anyone's allowed to buy what they want, then when you're anywhere in the world, it will be fragmented. You're not necessarily going to see what is the DNA, what's the brand. And I think if you say, for example, I don't know, let's say 8% of the collection is a mandatory buy, you have to buy it. I'm all for things like that, because it allows you to plan better. It allows you to know that wherever you are in the world, you'll have that key assortment. That allows you to show like your key looks, your hero product.
And then be creative with everything else.
Yeah, it allows you to show the DNA of the brand, whatever country you're in. And that for me is important, because it also makes you say instantly, let's say 8% of the collection you know is going to be bought, you'll make minimum, you don't need to cancel it, you can plan correctly with the factories. That already starts a more efficient operating model. And also when it comes to marketing, key looks, stories, aligned marketing launches around the world, you're allowing that because you're making your collection more kind of aligned.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge when there's many brands that are kind of working with different regions, and you're just talking, but almost like there's no accountability of how it's going to actually end, in a sense of where it's going to land on store. The shift is happening where it's more about traceability. And you definitely see it with like people like Zalando. They want to be able to invest in brands that are talking about sustainability, that you can show this is where your product comes from. What I think is great about the Zalandos of the world is that they do collaborations with brands. They also introduce the technology element, and also the insights they bring to brands, like what was the alternative brand's click rate? Where did the footfall of the website move to? Like, things like this I find really interesting, that they're able to bring those insights to brands as well.
Yeah.
But also, they join forces with marketing campaigns. They launch new products. It's almost like they're just as important as a brand in a sense of a platform. And I think that's why you see now that technology in e-com plays a huge part. And that's where AI really comes in when it comes to platforms, because like you say, you get emails telling you to buy this next product, and it's all based on what you just bought or what your interests are. So technology in that sense is feeding the need, because if you didn't get the email, you may not want that product. But this is where that whole thing is about consumption, like what's first, chicken or the egg? And that's, a really interesting point. And when it comes to the Gymsharks of the world, what I think has been so great for them is that it's almost like, they talk about it as well, right? The community, they build, you're buying into the community.
I spoke to Noel Mack on a previous episode, and that was very much at the center of what he talked about with their brand strategy. Was they identified that other sportswear brands weren't really making gym equipment, well, gym apparel. And they really sort of doubled down on building a community around people that use the gym and work out and do yoga and body pump lessons and that kind of thing. How do some of the brands that are established or new brands that are coming through, like how do you take that lesson? How would Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, Hugo Boss, some of the more established brands out there, how would they learn from those lessons of identifying the customer base at that level?
I think like with Gymshark, because they have such a community and everyone wants to be part of that community, I think it's really, really great that they started to kind of, you buy into the world of it, right? Rather, you're not just buying an item, you're buying into something. And I think
you're joining a club almost.
Yeah, and I think it's a great move that they've just opened up their store in Dubai. Yeah, which I think is brilliant. Because
in the huge mall, and they've got a big place on Oxford Street now as well.
Yeah, and obviously in Hong Kong, there's a hell of a lot of fitness that goes on, and a lot of people, like a lot of the gyms and a lot of the training groups, move to Dubai from Hong Kong. So I think in a fitness world, it's now Dubai's a heavy player. Yeah. So I think it's super, super great that they've seen, okay, there's a huge fitness scene in Dubai. Let's open up a retail store in there. So I think, again, it's great that Gymshark is showing how we can build a community and you get involved. So I think...
And really understanding the audience as well.
Yeah, so I think it's a great, great move. When it comes to brands that haven't necessarily been about influencers in the past or things like this, you definitely see a shift in like influencer marketing. Every bigger brand is now trying to collaborate. And it's not necessarily this celebrity wore this jean. It's very much about they become part of the brand, the story. It's not like a one-time campaign. It's very much, and you see that across bigger brands, like they're there part of the family. They're there over multiple seasons. They're living the life of the brand. It's almost, they're building a community. So I think more legacy brands are definitely doing that in their marketing now. Yeah. And you see that with a lot of brands. They're building a lifestyle again, where before it maybe they were just trying to sell product.
I mean, obviously we've talked about a multitude of brands. Gymshark that we've just mentioned grew to £1 billion turnover in about 7 years. There's going to be another one coming at some point. If somebody's watching this and they're thinking about starting a fashion brand, what would your advice be to that young entrepreneur that is like entering the world of fashion and would want to sort of replicate some of these success stories we've seen from the likes of Gymshark?
I think if you set a brand up now, I think it's a great opportunity almost, because there's so much going on that the bigger brands can't react so quick, or their operating model has been like that for 30 years. So I think it would be a super challenge to shift everything in a new way. So if I was telling someone tomorrow, if you want to set up a new brand, I would literally, it's like a Jenga, get your base super solid and then grow. Some people like just want to go all in. And I think for me personally, it can be a bit tricky. I think definitely when it comes to AI or data, in a kind of geek way, for me, I would be very much about get your technology right, get your data insights right, get your platforms right, really get like the infrastructure of the company super solid. Because if you can capture those data insights and you have your markets or whatever it may be aligned in the process, aligned in the data, aligned in the ways of working with technology, this is what everyone is striving for now because they didn't do it for so many years. So everyone's now trying backwards. So if you launch tomorrow, you really have an amazing opportunity to be like, let's get all the infrastructure super solid. And then you've got time for the fun stuff. Then you can be super creative. You can develop your brand slow and steady, start with a few product groups, but definitely about have a purpose, have a community, and almost like don't keep fighting or competing, because I think as a brand, you'll compete for the rest of your life.
Purpose and community really prevents you from having to do that though, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you keep your DNA.
Yeah, a very sort of defined purpose, very sort of defined in what you do and how you execute on that, then that would avoid just constantly competing, and worse than anything, competing on just price.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, product strategy is super important, and you can't have the same product strategy. Of course you have to evolve. Trends change, macroeconomic shift, you have to adapt your product strategy. But you can always have what your brand stands for, who are you, what you're about, who's your DNA. And that will always evolve. The creativity should evolve. It should always be adapting and changing to everything that's going on. But as a business, the creative side is one thing, but as a kind of running a business from A to Z, you almost want to get your stuff in order. And by being new and having certain platforms, certain data insights, certain technology, really leveraging now what data and AI can bring to the table, that for me would be a massive win, because everyone once again could talk about product. everyone can sit in a room and start looking at fabrics. But if you have a robust platform or a robust operating model, then you have so much time for fun. You can be creative as you want. It's brilliant. But you're kind of structuring your business for success from the beginning.
Yeah, when I think about the barriers to entry to start a new brand, obviously if you were going to look back 10, 15, 20 years, bricks and mortar shop or shops would have been super expensive. Bringing in staff would have been super expensive. Building a website, I mean, people think, oh yeah, go online, that's cheaper. Not necessarily. I mean, I've seen companies spend millions and millions of pounds on just literally building the website. What about going straight onto social media, sort of selling through Instagram, TikTok, and some of the other sort of social media platforms and working with influencers? What about doing something like that as a kind of a cottage industry to start with everything else in place, and putting those sort of background systems in place with the money that you've got, rather than pumping it into fancy websites and shops and having that physical presence? Would you advise somebody, if they're going to start, to go more with like a social media first strategy, or would you say that traditional get one shop, really start to understand and speak to your customers would be a better way of doing things?
For me personally, if I opened up a brand tomorrow, I wouldn't do retail for now, because for those exact reasons. The overheads, the investment that you have to do to secure bricks and mortar is for me would be too much. I massively think that the whole community vibe is coming from social media, whether it be TikTok or Instagram, whatever. So that's where I feel like you start from with a brand. You start promoting, you start developing that community, you start showing your DNA. And when you build that community and that traction, then for me, that's how you evolve. And it's the least input on investment you can do.
Yeah.
You can build so much traction and so much hype with minimal investment compared to back in the day. And then for me, my next step would be wholesale. It's very much about what customers do you want to go to? What's right for you? Where do you want to sell? Of course, there's investment there, but it's wholesale. I think when you go down to the retail side of things, it becomes a lot more to manage. There's a lot more responsibility, a lot more investment. Mm-hmm. And I think as a fresh startup, you don't go necessarily personally directly there. I think the whole chain evolves.
And then build it over time.
Yeah, and of course, and you also, everyone learned from COVID, right? That e-com was a massive player during COVID and bricks and mortar didn't work. But as I said, I'm a firm believer that you can go into any shop and buy any black t-shirt or any black dress roughly from anywhere. So what's the defining factor of why you went to that particular brand? Mm-hmm. And it's about social media, right? You resonate with the brand, it's your type of DNA, they have your message. And I think that's why retail experience is so important. I think the stores have to have something. And in my TED talk many, many years ago, I talk about interactive changing rooms, because that entices customers to come in. It brings a whole new experience element to a bricks and mortar store. And I think this is the art of fashion, right? You're just constantly evolving and adapting on how you grow your brand and shift to the trends.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about community as well. The other thing that I'm realizing is something that Apple started many years ago, having an experience store. And we're seeing lots of investment go into the bigger cities, certainly around Europe, but much less in the smaller towns. And I've definitely seen that in the UK. Are we moving to a model whereby we're gonna have experience stores and people go and visit those bigger cities maybe once a month, try things on, but then go away and buy online, and that's where the sort of online and offline meet? Or do you think there's still a lot of scope for brands to be increasing the footprint essentially and going into every town around each country that they're in? Or are we going to move to this sort of experience model like Apple's got, with a handful of stores in key cities, geographically located, and then majority kind of selling online?
Yeah, I personally think it's a hybrid way of working, like exactly about my point about the bricks and mortars and experience. I don't think we will necessarily see all these stores in every single location. And I think banks also show that trend.
Yeah.
Years ago, there would be a bank
every 3 miles.
Literally, there'd be two in one little town, and everyone would go to that bank and they'd do everything. I mean, you can't find many bank locations right now.
You can barely find a cash machine.
So everything's online. Like, you can do everything online and it works efficiently. And of course,
people do still want to touch and feel and experience
and
the
that's
product.
why there's still bank locations.
Yeah.
Because some people want to have the person to person, the feeling human element. And that's why you do see that some of them are reopening because they miss that element of in person. So to your point, I don't think we will have stores popping up in every location because it's kind of shown that it's not going to work. The footfall's not there. And Canary Wharf in London's a great example. I mean, everyone went to the offices Monday to Friday. At lunchtimes, everywhere was packed. Now, when people aren't in the offices so much, it's so quiet.
It's a ghost town.
Literally. So it shows that you can't fulfill a full footfall store as you would plan your sell-through. So I think you would definitely, like you say, have experienced locations, which is definitely for a community. You go there for coffee, you can experience what the brand's up to, you see all their initiatives, you see the lifestyle of what they're trying to sell. But then you have all the other ways, e-com, wholesale, Instagram, TikTok. I feel like
it's a combination of all of that.
And if one doesn't work, you also have backups almost. It's almost like back in the day, everyone relied on retail and that was it. If it didn't work, all the stores were closed and there wasn't a backup. Now with Instagram, TikTok, e-com websites and all the other initiatives and collaborations that go on, you're increasing all of your channels for scope. So I feel like you can definitely manage better the brand and also control much more the message of the brand to multiple channels. So for me, I think it's definitely going to be hybrid. If you're a brand, it's great, right? You're selling yourself 24 hours a day. We're in a store, you're locking the door at 6 p.m. So you're just continuing the whole lifestyle that you're trying to sell. So, I mean, to be honest, also, everyone is trying to get market share, right? So I think any new innovative way to sell product or increase your market share or bring in a new target audience, I think everyone will probably go out their way also to try and take some of that share and drive revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely bought outfits at 3 a.m. when I get back in from a night out.
That's another story.
So, as we mentioned before, 20 odd years in fashion, still only look 25. No Botox ever been used.
No, for sure.
Given your time again, are you glad you made the decision to work in fashion?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I think people have said to me, like, would you work in another industry or like transferable skills? But no, I do love working in the industry. And I think you have the same challenges with any industry. It's kind of the same thing, just different product. But I think after 20 years, I'm really passionate about the industry. I've learned a lot, done a lot. So yeah, I think, I'm super glad I did it. And and fingers crossed we'll be continuing to do it for a long time.
So do we need to keep our eyes out in sort of 10, 15 years time for Steve Brown, the label?
No, hopefully I'll be on a beach.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to this beautiful city.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
It's been lovely having a walk around Amsterdam and taking that in. And obviously now I'm aware that it's a bit more of a fashion capital than I was aware of beforehand.
For sure.
But yeah, honestly, thanks very much for joining us.
Cool.
And hopefully we'll see you again soon. We'll get you back on in a year or two and catch up about whatever's going on in fashion at that point in time.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.